All right, good afternoon. My name is Evan Chavette. This is for Angelo State University's Communications 1315 Public Speaking. This is my persuasive speech. This is my audience. Thank you very much. I'll go ahead and get started.
Plus the camera person.
Plus the camera person. Think for a moment of your favorite classroom when you were growing up. Think of the rows of desks, students sitting at them, raising their hand, asking questions. Think about the relationships that form between teacher and student, between the students themselves, and maybe even with that classroom, with that school. Now consider, thanks to the explosive growth of online learning, those classrooms that you grew up with are becoming rare. So the purpose of this speech today is to help persuade you to consider how much better that traditional classroom learning is than what we have for online learning today. So for this topic, I read scholarly journals, sought out quotes from teachers, and interviewed one of my students that I teach. And as a professional military instructor and a college student, I've been on both sides of both the face-to-face and the online classroom. So the three main points that I'm going to cover are: one, that connection between students and teachers. The second is how much more effective a traditional classroom is than an online one. And third, to consider how much better focus students have in that traditional classroom. So we'll begin with that first thing I mentioned, the student-teacher connection. So Zachary Zarko is a high school technology teacher. He has decades of experience in both online and traditional classrooms. And he identified a few reasons of why things are so much better in the traditional classroom. The first is that he says that face-to-face communication between student and teacher is so much more responsive in the traditional classroom, not fumbling with technology and pressing screens and microphones. He also notes that a traditional classroom, it's far easier for students to ask and receive answers to questions. And finally, and I think the most important, in a traditional classroom, a teacher can far easier detect and correct student confusion. Now, students and teachers all completely agree with this. How do I say this? EduCause, it's an organization, they conducted the Center for Analysis and Research survey. They reached out to 40,000 students and almost 10,000 teachers. And 70% of students and 73% of teachers said they far prefer face-to-face classroom. So my second point, thinking about how effective really is a traditional classroom versus that online one. So McKinsey and Company, they did a survey called Learning Loss is Global and Significant. And 60% of US teachers rated the effectiveness of online learning a 1 to 3 out of 10. That's in terms of classroom participation, content delivery, and retention of information. Now, my interview that I mentioned at the beginning, my student, her name is Regina, and she took a face-to-face class with me this week and an online class with me 2 weeks ago, and she was emphatic that not only was the face-to-face class more fun, but she was able to pay attention more, it was far more engaging, and she definitely learned more, and said she thinks she's going to remember more from that class. And from my own perspective of online classes versus the classroom, I feel the same way. Now, this isn't just us normal students. At our highest level of education, Biomedical Central Education, they conducted a comparative study between online learning and face-to-face for medical students, as in those who are becoming physicians. And for the medical students who took primarily online classes, not only did they score lower on tests overall, but they scored lower in 5 different categories: participation, communication, preparation, critical thinking, and group collaboration. In other words, the traditional classroom environment, they did better in almost every respect. So what's one of the reasons that effectiveness is lowered? Distractions. For any of you in front of me who've all taken online classes, especially in the home, and you can think about how distracting that can be. Now think about our younger students. Diego Jimenez, he goes to high school at Luther Burbank in Sacramento, California. He's a JROTC cadet. He appreciates he doesn't have to wake up at 6 a.m. anymore to go to school because he's in online learning. However, he does not like online classes. He's frequently confused by the directions on his Chromebook that his teacher leaves for him. And he hates that he can't ask his teacher a question easily to figure out how to do this work in front of him. And he's frequently distracted by the, as he says, craziness going around him in his house where he takes his classes. Now, Diego's experience is not isolated. University of South Carolina survey of low-income families in education says only 1 in 3 students even has a place that they can guarantee they'll have quiet to do schoolwork every day. If you want to include middle and upper-class families, only 1 in 2. The traditional classroom just offers a routine and a structure that develops students' learning. Fewer distractions. And not only that, but schools have additional resources such as study halls and libraries, but even after class, students have a place to go. So in conclusion, I want to emphasize the 3 things I mentioned. 1, the invaluable connection between teacher and student in a traditional classroom is irreplaceable. No online course can do that. The traditional classroom has just proven to be more effective, again, in information retention, participation in the classroom, and content delivery for teachers. And finally, face-to-face learning in a traditional classroom has far fewer distractions in an online environment, especially the ones in our homes. So I hope that these things help persuade you that traditional learning is simply superior to online learning. And I want to end with this thought that in 2014, 8 years ago, the Sloan Corporation surveyed academic leaders in most major institutions, and 2/3 of them back then said that online learning was critical to their long-term strategy. And you can see that today. Virtually every single organization, or government organization, has adapted online learning as a primary learning source, citing convenience and cost. But we cannot forget that classroom. We cannot forget why it was our favorite, the connections that we made, and how much more we learned and gained from that. So thank you very much for your time. I hope you guys have a wonderful day. This is our audience still.